This is a whistle-stop tour through business planning and society management. We're sharing with you some examples of how we're working. I don't think there's any right answer to any of this, so do please ask any questions as we go along in the chat channel, and we'll try to deal with those as we go. So the seminar is being delivered by me, Barbara Hammond. I'm the CEO of the Low Carbon Hub, and there's a little blurb about me on the slide there, and by Kat Ludiker, who has been working with the Low Carbon Hub for most of its life, and you can see from the little blurb about her there that she's got a lot of experience in co-op and community development way beyond just the energy field, and she'll bring all of that to bear when she's talking about society management. I suggest that we use the chat channel for people to say hello and introduce themselves, because otherwise we're going to run seriously short of time, but please do use that, and we'll be attempting to keep the conversation running through that as we go through the seminar. So we've divided this session into two parts. One is the first part is about managing your business, business plan, annual budget, cash flow, management and year-end accounts, and contracts. Whistle stop, as we say, and I'll be using some examples that I'll get up onto the screen hopefully, and then Kat will go into the details of about how you actually manage a co-op or a community benefit society, and you know, the specific things that we think that it would be good to highlight for you. And as the little bubble says on there, please do ask questions as we go. Okay, so I think the key point to make here is, particularly in this context where there's an enormous amount of infrastructure behind all of your businesses here, with the sort of bright renewables and the sort of core projects, but it's to emphasize that you still have a fiduciary duty as directors of a business, whether a co-op or community benefit society. There's no absolution from that, and so you sort of need to be in a position where you know enough to be able to assure the business and assure that the business is working correctly for your shareholders, and that's really what we're trying to focus on this evening. And also how that sort of works when a lot of the stuff is outsourced. We're trying to make links to the other webinars in the series, Fliss on the evolving energy market, Kathy on society law, board powers and government governance, Sophie on comms, Simon on community share offers, and Saskia on impact and community benefit. We hope they'll all sort of make a nice whole, but I know that you'll be able to work with CSE following up from these webinars to work out what sort of workshops you might need to go in depth into areas that you need to do. So, you know, if all of this is meat and drink to you and you've been running all sorts of businesses all your life, please do let this all wash over you. I'm sure we're not going to be telling you anything new. And as it says on the bottom there, we will be sending you a follow-up document with links to all the resources we use in this webinar. So I'm just going to be flashing over these. Do go back to them when you get that document following up. So going on to just to recap on what we understand about the Bright Renewables core service for you, and then the optional ones later. So our understanding as community benefit societies within this structure Bright is going to be doing the operational asset management for you under contract to you. They're also going to be doing the finance and accounting for the projects. They're going to be supporting the board in, lucky you, producing all the papers for all of your meetings. That sounds amazing. Company secretarial services, document storage and access. They're going to be making sure that you comply with regulation as regards the assets, and particularly on health and safety. So a lot of that backing up from Bright Renewables is there, and you've just got to make sure that you really understand how you intersect with it. And then there are some services being offered by Bright, if we can go on to the next one, Kat, which are optional to you or additional. First one of those, investor relations. One of the things that we've found, having taken over our share register for all of our shareholders, is that it gives us a very immediate relationship with our shareholders. So I think one of the things that you need to be bearing in mind as you work with Bright on those services, if you do, is how to really have that sort of direct understanding of how shareholders are thinking and the things that are most important to them, and the parts of that relationship that really you need to hold rather than Bright, which are the less transactional relationships that you need to have with them. Then the web and social media, yes, obviously it looks as though I understand that Bright are offering to set up and maintain websites, but you're in control of your messaging. So how does that, how do those services interact, or how does your job interact with the Bright job there? And particularly around community benefit, how you use that and how you develop community energy in your area. And then obviously loan compliance and refinance. That's something that I'm sure is going to be very important to everyone. And that seems to be an area where, given the nature of the beast, it would be very good if you were working closely with Bright on those. Okay, next slide. So do please put in the chat channel if I've misunderstood any of that, or if there are particular aspects of that you'd like us to focus on or come back to, but just to make sure that we all understand what the situation is. So the first question, and I know we have Andrew Moore on here, so with apologies to Andrew for using the Elm example, but we think it's a good one to contrast with the Low Carbon Hub business plan. So what we're going to do for each of these aspects, we'll be giving you examples, and then you've got the resources listed on the slides, which will also be listed in the follow-up document for you to follow up as you wish. So I'm now going to try and share my screen so that I can just whiz you through the main things that we would certainly be expecting to include in a business plan. So first one, if hopefully that is going to work. Ooh. Are you seeing, is everybody seeing the Low Carbon Hub business plan?
Yep, Barbara, we can see that very clear.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I can't actually see what you're seeing, which is really weird. So I'm going to scroll through, and I'm not sure whether this is going to scroll through. So we're looking at the first page of the Low Carbon Hub business plan for the period that finished on the 31st of March 2020. Is everyone seeing that?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. So just whizzing through that, at the table of contents, you can see, you can look at this at your leisure, but what we're doing in the business plan is going from our vision in section 1 right through to the financial projections for the business in section 12. So what we're trying to do here is to give anyone that we're working with a full sight of where we're trying to get to as a business. And for the Low Carbon Hub, that's going to be quite different than you guys, probably in your first 3 years, because the Low Carbon Hub is trying to show how it's going to grow as a business and do things differently as a business. Vision and aim, we've tried really hard to get this down, to really pack this down. And then we're trying to follow through from that through what our organization is, what the opportunity is, why we're there as a business, what we're trying to exploit here as a business, and then what our objectives are for the 3-year period covered by the business plan. It's really easy to get sidetracked by what you want to achieve by 2050 or 2030 or whenever your vision extends to, but you've got to try and really focus down on what you can achieve in that 3-year period you're dealing with. And we distilled that into 4 things that we were trying to achieve over the plan period. And it was everything from a really sort of, we're going to make sure that our administration is better, we're going to grow the systems there, through to catalyzing innovation, which is what we're using our community benefit to do. So it really is, it was trying to distill everything to the things that we were going to focus on as a business and with our board. And then we go into how we're going to deliver that. And then we had, as you can see, we updated it each year. So we had the key areas of focus for each of those years, that we meant that every year we were updating it and using that with our board, our shareholders, and to support our community share offers. And then just to prefigure the sort of thing that Saskia is going to talk about in her webinar, we try to be very specific about what our impact targets are. And I'm sure if you compare this business plan with the one that we'll be putting up on our website for the next 3 years, if you compare the targets section in both of those, you'll see that we set ourselves stretch targets for the 3 years that just ended. We got quite a long way towards them, but we didn't hit those targets. And I think that's fine for a business plan. You've got to show what your aspirations are in as realistic a way as you can. And there are 1 or 2 policy changes from government that made it a little bit more difficult to hit the targets we'd set for ourselves. We measure social impact by planet, prosperity, people, and perception. You'll have your own ways of doing it. Those are just ours. But we like to be as transparent as we can about where we're trying to get to and how we're going to measure it. What we're doing is by no means as good as we would like it to be, but we have to keep it proportional with the resources that we can put into keeping that system updated. And then we go into the nitty-gritty of finance, funding, risks, and our financial projections, which are both for the Low Carbon Hub, IPS and KIC, and also for the development of our Community Energy Fund. So that's what we expect to have in a business plan as the Low Carbon Hub. And then that sort of compares with the way that Yelm, if I am sharing my screen again, hopefully, the Yelm, this draft of their business plan is expressing what they want to do and how they want to do it. And please do use both of these examples. I hope Yelm won't mind. I hope they'll be flattered that they're doing much the same thing, but they're doing it in their way. And they're going again from the vision and the purpose right through to what it is that they want to do over the next 3 years and how they're going to finance that. That's really the top and bottom of a business plan. And it needs to be only as long as it needs to be. Don't think that you've got to produce 50 pages when 10 pages will do. So that's the business planning examples that we've got. GDPR, we've got a question about, which we'll come back to later on. Kat, have we got the slides back up now? Lovely, thank you very much. So if we could go on from business planning to the next slide. The budget, okay. So having done your business plan, that will give you a sense of what your financials are going to look like over the 3 years of a business plan. And then what I like to do, everybody in the Low Carbon Hub will know that I like to know where every single pound in the Low Carbon Hub is going, because I'm a cash is queen person. It's very easy to beguile yourself with figures in a business plan and then sort of lose sight of what the business is actually doing. So I like to run a budget versus actuals and set a budget for the year and then monitor through the course of the year how we're doing against that budget. It's not quite a cash flow, but it is giving you a sense of whether anything is going really wrong with how you thought the year was going to go. And I'm just going to share with you the Low Carbon Hub IPS budget versus actuals for this year, for you to get a sense of what that means for me. There we go. So hopefully you can see that budget versus actuals on your screen now. And this is a PDF download from our QuickBooks accounting system. We're getting to the point now where QuickBooks is getting a little bit beyond being fit for purpose for us, and we're looking for the next stage. But it's been brilliant so far, and I really find it very easy and intuitive to use as a system, and it produces these really nice reports at the click of a button. What we've got here is, on the left, we've got the budget as we've uploaded it for this year. And we can see that budget over the 4 quarters or over the 12 months. And clearly, income and expenditure is not going to be sort of smooth month by month. It's going to be lumpy. And it's quite good to have a sense of when you expect money to be coming in over the course of a year. But for this, I've just shown you the whole year with the actuals to date. So we can monitor income, and I'm showing you the IPS because it's a little bit different from, you know, it's more like what you're going to have as core community benefit society, and then expenses, everything from community benefit donations down to meter operator agreements, interest income that we get from Sanford Hydro at the bottom there, and then depreciation expenses. And just one thing to be saying there, I think that the core kicks are going to work differently from this to this, but you'll see that our depreciation expense is sort of below the line. So we show a net operating income, which we expect for this coming year to be just under £250,000. And we have a depreciation expense below the line, because we treat all of our assets as wasting assets, which means that they have a 20-year straight line depreciation, but we're not banking that depreciation cash to replace those assets at the end of 20 years. And that means that because our member interest expense, which you can see as 220k under expenses there, 6044 members interest expense, that's treated, because we're a community benefit society, as an operating expense, which means that we don't have to prove a profit in order to pay a dividend. We're paying an interest payment as an operating expense. And that means that we can run really efficiently because we can use our depreciation expense to show a loss. Although next year it's looking as though we're going to have to do a bit more thinking about paying some more community benefit donations. We've only budgeted for 35k this year for reasons that I'm very happy to go into with anyone if anybody wants me to. But it looks as though we might want to make more community benefit donation than we are in order to keep the society tax efficient by breaking as close to even as possible at the end of the year. So that's one of the things that I like to keep an eagle eye on through the course of the year. And it's one thing that I like to monitor at our management team meetings every week and at our board meetings every quarter. Okay, so getting the slides back up, Kat. That's a sort of very basic thing that I like to be riffling through in a way that Low Carbon Hub staff find very annoying. I quite often do it at the weekends. Then the other thing that I like to have, because cash is queen for me, is a cash flow. I like to see what I've got in the bank, what's coming up over the year, when it's likely to happen, and then updating that as it goes. And the example that I'm going to be using here is my really steam-driven one that I do as in my volunteer role as director of Oseley Lock Hydro, so that you can be shocked by my rough and ready Excel skills, but you know it only needs to be rough and ready because it just needs to show us in not a pretty way at all, a very practical way, what the cash flow over the course of a year is going to be. So I hope you can see that. This is the Oseley Lock Hydro one. And what I like to put in at the beginning, up at the top under April, is the cash that we had in the bank on the 31st of March, so that I can see what our net cash position might be if all goes according to plan at the end of the year. And then you can see the sorts of expenditures we have. It's a much simpler set of expenses than the Low Carbon Hub IPS has. This is the pattern that you see of expenditure over the years, the pattern that we saw last year and I expect to have this year. You'll see a shareholder payment going out in September of just over £19,000. That, as you can see, is our major expense through the year for Oseley Lock Hydro. And that figure of £19,000 is only 2.5% return, because if you remember last year, we had a very dry summer and then an incredibly wet winter, which is the worst combination you can possibly have for a happy hydro scheme. And that means that we were down on our income for last year. And so that's reflected in the return that we can make to shareholders. In years when we are above our average income, we would then expect to pay more than the expected shareholder return. And then you can see down at the bottom, I run an income calculation where I'm monitoring how much generation the hydro is making quarter by quarter. So the figure for Q1 is an actual, because we've generated just over 48,000 kilowatt hours so far this year. But then the other quarters are as expected if the model works as we expect it to. So the Q2, sort of July, August, September, we don't tend to generate much, if anything. And then Q3 and Q4 over the winter period are the ones that where we expect to make most of our money. So, but this it means that I can keep up to date as to what's happening, make sure we've got money in the bank, make sure that we've got money in the bank if we need to, if something goes disastrously wrong, and just ensure that the business is just running day to day as I want it to run. And this is the position that we try to get to as well with the Low Carbon Hub, IPS and KIC and Sanford Hydro, so that we're running a sort of, we're running a sort of PO list, and how that feeds into the cash flow, as well as understanding what billing we've got to do in all of those organisations to make sure that the budget that we've set at the beginning of the year is actually going to work. And we know what our liabilities are, and we know if we're getting ahead of ourselves in agreeing POs for expenditure, if income gets a little bit sticky and a little bit delayed, which clearly we're seeing a bit this year because of coronavirus. Schools, for example, have not been, they've only had a skeleton staff, and so our sales to schools, the income from that is quite a way behind at the moment, and we're monitoring that. So Kat, if we could go back to the next slide, please. Lovely, thank you. So that's cash flow. Now the question of management accounts. Any of you who've been involved in running any sort of size of business will be used to sitting on a board and every time you meet being presented with a set of management accounts. What we found in our experience of running the Low Carbon Hub so far is that it's really hard producing a set of management accounts for the board, because in order to do that, you have to close the books, which means that if you're doing it quarterly or if you're doing it monthly, which is the ideal for a business of the size that the Low Carbon Hub is now at, closing the books really needs quite a lot of work, because it essentially means that you're doing a mini year-end process every quarter or every month, so that you can present a set of accounts with verified figures in it. So I think the message for you guys on this, Penny's saying that Bright provides those quarterly management accounts. So the question is, if Bright is presenting those quarterly management accounts for the asset itself, how does that intersect with your use of the community benefit surplus that comes off that asset? And how do those two sets of books intersect? We're not going to solve that now. Maybe Bright are doing all of that, which would be absolutely amazing. But it does mean that if you have any sort of grant expenditure going on, we all know that grant expenditure is always slower than you think it's going to be. And if you don't accrue for that properly, you'll be a little bit bitten on the bum when suddenly a big chunk of grant is spent and there's an invoice for that from the grantee. So you probably need to think quite carefully about whether you just need the management accounts that Bright are going to be producing for the asset. And you probably do, actually, because then you can be just running a cash flow and a budget for the year on the community benefit aspects of that. And that'll be a really lovely set of docs to have. So my personal view, I'd always go for having a good cash flow and a good annual budget than having a really slick set of management accounts, because I want to know where the money is. Okay, Kat, next slide. Thanks. And then there's the question of year-end accounts, which I'm sure from Penny's response, Bright is going to be producing for you. But again, there's the question as to whether they do the full CBS, and it looks as though that's an optional service. But whether they do or not, you as directors have to understand what's in there, and you have to know what the figures mean. You have to be able to present them to your shareholders at the AGM, and you have to be able to explain the figures to your shareholders at the AGM, and your shareholders have to vote to accept them. So it's really, really important that you get under the skin of those, and you've really thought it through. I don't know about you guys, I'm not a very mathematical person, but I do understand the pattern that numbers are telling me. But in order to understand that pattern, I generally have to work through it quite slowly, step by step, in order really to make sure I've understood it. So year-end accounts, I just wanted to show you, again, this is another one of the voluntary hats. This is West Oxford Community Renewables, which has a set of rooftop solar projects. And that uses a different accounting tool called Zero, which again produces really nice reports at the click of a button if you can get your head around how to use it. And I just wanted to talk about the difference between the information that a P&L gives you and the information that a balance sheet gives you. So where are we? Oh, hang on a minute. I'm sorry, guys, I'm going to have to make sure I can't see that example. I will just make sure it's opened up before I share it. Here we go. Right. Hopefully that will now work and I'll be able to see that when I'm sharing it. Yes, here we go. So just starting with the profit and loss. This is the West Oxford Community Renewables profit and loss for last financial year. And one of the things that it's really nice to do is be able to compare that with similar periods. So you can see what's happening from March to now this year alongside that. But quite often we also like to look at what happened during the year 18 to 19, for example, so that you can see the sort of trends that are happening in the business. But it's very simple. What it's showing is what income you got in a year and what expenditure you made through the year, and then the net profit resulting from that. But the thing that I just wanted to say, it's obvious once you've thought about it, but and for those of you, again, who've been running businesses for ages, you will know this stuff like falling off a log. What a P&L shows you is the past. It looks back. It doesn't tell you anything about what's going to happen in the future. It's just looking at the past. It's just telling you where you got to by a certain date, which is a fairly arbitrary date, but by a certain date. So it looks back. It's nice and simple, but it looks back. What a balance sheet does, and hopefully you can see the balance sheet now. Yes?
Not yet.
Maybe I have to stop sharing and then share again to get that up separately, which I'll now do. So I'm now showing you the balance sheet. Can you see the balance sheet?
Yep, Barbara, I think we can, yeah.
Brilliant. So the same thing here. What I did was, as of the 30th of June, which is coming up, so we're not quite there yet, and again, comparing to the previous year. But the thing that a balance sheet shows you is where you're going. It's sort of the other, it shows you what you've got in your bank account. It shows you what you've got coming in, what you're still to receive.
We're still on the profit and loss.
Oh, okay. Well, let me shut down the profit and loss and see if that. Okay. Let me try again.
She was just checking we're paying attention.
Thanks, Saskia. So
I noted Graham thought it was a balance sheet.
Sorry, that's caught me out there as trying to multitask while we're going through this. Barbara, is that us on the right thing now? Are we still?
I think you're seeing a balance sheet now.
Balance
Yeah,
sheet.
it says balance
Yes.
sheet at the top.
Yeah, fantastic. So, so the thing that I'm just showing here is that whereas the profit and loss is sort of looking backwards, the balance sheet is allowing you to see where you are, and then the cash flow looks forward, and the budget looks forward. So this is showing us what we've got in the bank. It's showing us what we've got receivable. It shows us accrued income and prepayments if you've got any prepayments. So, and then it's showing you your fixed assets, that, you know, what the book value is of the of your assets, and it's showing you your liabilities. So the accounts payable, accruals that you've got on your balance sheet that have either been paid in advance or are going to be paid. And also, you won't have this, but one of the things that we have in WACOR is the really odd thing about grant. If you've been given a grant towards an asset, you depreciate it in the same way that you depreciate the book value, even though it was paid to you years ago, and it sort of shows on your balance sheet. It took us ages to understand that and why we had to do it like that. And it shows you what your deferred tax is, so that you can see what tax allowance you've got to play with. One of the things we're starting to see with West Oxford Community Renewables is that we're starting to run out of tax allowance on the capital cost of the original items. So we're really going to have to look carefully at how we get community benefit out of the door if we're not going to start making a profit that we have to pay tax on. Now, I understand, particularly in these days of COVID, that somebody's got to pay tax, but we'd rather it wasn't us. We'd rather we spent all of that on community benefit. But the thing that I'm looking at regularly on the balance sheet is how much I've actually got in the bank, because you can get behind on cash flows and you can get behind on budget versus actuals. But if you've got an accounting system up and running, it will be linking to your bank accounts and it won't lie. It will tell you what money you've got, and it will tell you what your accounts receivable are. And I like to keep tabs on the aged ones who hasn't paid for a while, that we really have got to get our tabs on and get them paying us. So hopefully that gives you a sort of little sense of all the tools available to us in managing our businesses well, and how they intersect with each other, and which ones you want to be really concentrating on day to day, and then which ones need to look really slick and beautiful for when you present them to the external world. So Penny's asked about tax liability and whether you can reduce it by doing project development or giving. So we do reduce our tax liability, Penny, by making donations that are considered to be operating expenses that are not made out of profits. So we've set up our accounts in order to show that. So our community benefit payments are all operating expenses in West Oxford Community Renewables, Newark Hydro and the Low Carbon Hub. Project development, work in progress, I think I'm right in saying can also be used to as operating expense above the line. So I think both of those things are ways of reducing tax liability, but clearly you've got to balance the desirability of hitting naught as your profit every year against the desirability of building up a buffer. And that's something that we're always thinking about for the Low Carbon Hub in particular, where we're trying to manage the kick to naught every year. So there's no profit in there, there's no fat in there, and we're keeping all of the money, not all of the money, we're keeping cash in the IPS and in Sanford Hydro, because those are the ones with the big tax allowances because of the big capital expenditure. So we've got quite a lot of tax allowance to get rid of or to work through, and can therefore be keeping money in there without risking paying tax. Okay, so that's my bit done. I'll hand over to Kat so that she can be telling you, oh God, contracts. Sorry, Kat, thank you. I'm not going to say a lot about managing contracts, just two bits to say now as we're galloping through this managing societies thing. And it's really, really basic, obvious stuff. But first thing, you need to know what you're getting into, and you need to be clear on the purpose of entering a contract, and that contract is going to meet the purpose. And second piece of advice is, if you are not confident, it's worth paying somebody to have a look at that contract and ensure that that contract is right. You know, clearly, if it's a contract for paper clips, you should be able to do it. But if it's a contract for a big repair, or a big new bit of capital, you want to put in a battery or something, it's probably a good thing to get a lawyer to look it over for you and make sure that it's right, and even draft it for you. Okay, I think that's all. And then, of course, having set up the contract, you need to have the monitoring processes in place to make sure that that is delivered to time, to cost, and to quality. Okay, I think that's my bit done. If there are any questions beyond the ones that have come up in the chat channel, please do raise them. I think there's a putting hands up function. If there's anything that occurs as Kat's going through her bit, I'll be typing in the chat channel, so please do put them up. And if there's anything that you want to go into in more depth, that's where you'll be talking to CSE and the follow-up workshops, so that we can really make sure we're answering your questions in the way that you need them to be answered. Thanks. Handing over, Kat, now.
Hello, sorry, I might put up my video a bit later, but hopefully this will work. So, and it's hard to judge in a way for me, especially I haven't really talked to any of you what the right level is. So in the chat, do say if you go faster, go slower, or focus on this.
Kat, I'm just going to jump in there. Your line's a little bit unclear. So what I might suggest is if I share the presentation, it might clear up the issues with the connection there. So what I'll do, I'll just, if you want to, I'll very shortly share my screen and get us up onto the presentation. Hopefully that will sort it out.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Slightly better.
Kat, I think we're still seeing your screen. Are you going to hand over to Graham to see if that helps?
Yeah, Graham can take over by himself, I think. So I'm just leaving it up while he's getting ready.
Okay, I'll be with you in 1 second. I've just got the PowerPoint coming up now.
Brilliant. Now, unfortunately, Kat, we're only hearing about a third of your words.
Okay. I've closed everything down apart from Zoom, so mode on those.
Yeah, okay, so hopefully everyone should be able to see that on my screen just now.
Yes.
Great. Okay, Kat, let's try that. Hopefully that will have cleared up the interference issues.
Thank you, that's very kind. So what I've put down there, so obviously you do have your community benefit societies rules, and where you do have one or more KICs that the CBS owns, you've got articles. And if you read them, it will explain obviously how you can change them. But that usually requires members' consent and some official channels. So that's sort of the basics, obviously, within which you need to operate. But usually an organization also needs other policies and procedures to operate effectively. And you can see in the little kind of sun that really the key message, I think, for us for this is it's important, to start with what's kind of relevant and most kind of key to you. And it's about being really a policy and procedures there to kind of clarify and make transparent and obvious to anyone, within your organization, maybe supporters, other people, external stakeholders, funders, potentially, partners, to make it clear how you do something, why you do it, why you do it that particular way. So it's really just a kind of helpful thing instead of just kind of having, just evolve something and then it's not written down and someone new kind of coming and goes like, oh, really? How do you do this? Why do you do that? It's there for everyone to see and you can agree or, decide at some point to review it. So hopefully you've got to start out with like a review of policies, but focus on some key ones. And obviously some of them are important in the sense.
Kat, you're breaking up quite a lot again.
So I'm thinking we could, if everyone's able to hear me, I'm thinking it might be best if we, Kat, I'm not sure if there's anything you can do to improve your connection from where you're sat, but perhaps we could give it one more go. And if we're really struggling with the audio, what we can do is do a Q&A session just now on any points that have come up from Barbara's, and perhaps for Kat's half, we'd be able to do a pre-recorded presentation and send that out at a later point, or perhaps reschedule it. But should we give it one more go, Kat? I don't know if there's any way to any way you can improve the audio.
Yeah, is it better now?
No.
No,
Sorry, Kat.
no better.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay, I suggest the best thing is going to be if we do a Q&A, if anyone had any points that were coming out of Barbara's presentation there, and then Kat, perhaps we can let's liaise separately, and we'll work out perhaps either reschedule this or we'll do a pre-recorded one once we've got better connection. I'm just going to drop off this. I'm going to put us back up to questions, and yeah, just open out to the floor if anyone's got any points they want to raise. Have we got anything in the chat box, Barbara? Unfortunately, I can't see the chat box with the screen share.
So Andrew is from Yelm is saying that he really wants to see Kat's slides. So I'm just wondering whether we couldn't whiz through them, and then so that people can see what's available and what Kat was going to go through, and then it'll sort of prime people for when she can actually be there for Q&A on it.
Yeah, I think that sounds very sensible. Perhaps we can, Barbara, I don't know if you can give us a brief guide to them. Maybe Kat can try chip in. We'll see.
So what I suggest, Kat, is that I whiz through them, and then you're on the chat channel if anybody's got questions coming up. I'm not going to do it as well as Kat would do, but I'll have a little go. So the first thing, she was just making sure, what she's got in the green sun on the slide there is the really most important point. If you try to have a policy for everything, you send yourself absolutely crazy. So focus on what's important and practical for you. you can have policies that are sort of secondary to your rules. Having set your rules or your articles for a KIC, it's quite hard then to change them. So be really careful about what your rules say. We had a really hard time changing our rules about the quorum for the Low Carbon Hub KIC, because as we got more and more shareholders, it became less and less likely that we'd be able to get like 100 people to an AGM, because AGMs are by their very nature quite boring. So we had a rule that we had to have 10% of our membership there, which was a foolish thing to do, as we found out. So the things that you need to have, she's listed there. And I think we would say from experience that these are the really important ones. You need to know what you're doing about data. And I think we had a question about GDPR earlier up in the chat channel. And I know that Saskia is very well placed to answer questions on that. If Kat can't do it in person, but Kat can also answer in the chat channel as well. Community benefit and impact strategy. Saskia will be doing a whole webinar on that, and it is really important to the CBS. You absolutely have to do that, because you are there for the community, and that takes precedence over shareholders. And I think it's quite hard to remember that when you're dealing with shareholders, but you are there for the benefit of the community, not primarily for the benefit of shareholders. Membership strategy, absolutely, you have to look after your members. They are your life's blood, and they have to be treated carefully because they have given you money, and you can't be light-hearted about that. You've got to take it seriously. I know it's like teaching grandma to suck eggs, that bit, but we did get it wrong in one of our share offers. My fat finger typed the wrong date, and we were actually going to give the first shareholder return a year later than it said in our offer document. And one of our shareholders got very cross about it, and we could have handled that a lot better than we did. Directors' code of conduct, yes, absolutely. You need to be quite transparent about what you're doing and how you're doing it and why you're doing it as directors. People need to be able to hold you to a standard of conduct. And health and safety and risk policies, yes, absolutely. Hopefully you're going to be able to use the sites of the assets that you own for tours, for visits, for events, for all sorts of lovely things to get people in touch with renewable energy. And if you're going to do that, you need to have the right health and safety policies and insurance to support you in doing that.
And I was just going to interject there, I'll be voice of Kat. Kat was just making the point that some things you actually need by law. So data protection policy you need by law. Other things are just going to be really useful things to guide you and make sure that you work efficiently and effectively. She's also, just to flag up, she has produced a guidance note which signposts you to, there's some really great resources from organisations that cover a lot of this, and she's has done a summary document to point you in the direction of further in-depth information, all of these.
Yeah, and we've got really great access to some of those organisations who've produced that through Simon and Kathy. So thanks for that, Saskia. This is why I need a team around me, because I gaily go ahead doing things, go, oh, yes.
Kat has also pointed out you never need to start from scratch on these things. Always go and find somebody else's policy and adapt it rather than worry about building something from first principles up.
Sit on the shoulders of giants. Next slide, Graham, please. Okay, so I think that we understand that all of you are setting up CBSs, but the assets are being held in KICs. So you sort of need to know for the KIC how it all works. And it's a different regulatory system because KICs are under Companies House and CBSs are under the Financial Conduct Authority. But you absolutely need to know inside out all the rules around running a community benefit society. There is, on the KIC side, as Kat has said, an office for the KIC regulator. So there is stuff out there. She'll signpost to all of it. But the key points that she's listed on this slide that really are important: legal deadlines for reporting. The annual report's due 7 months after the year end, and if you don't submit it, you get fined. the annual reports that you submit to the FCA are public documents. They have a mutuals register now, which is akin to the database that you can get onto in Companies House. So it's really important that those are produced well, and that the annual report has the report in it from directors about the community benefit activity that you have undertaken that year. It's not just the financials, it's what you've actually done to provide benefit to the community. There are regulations around audit and exemptions, and one of the decisions that you'll have to make is whether the accounts of your CBS need to be audited. The view we take is that if we've taken shareholder cash, we need to have an audit done. And it's only this year that last financial year that we've started auditing the KIC, but we've always audited the Hub IPS. Who needs to sign them off? Getting your ducks in a row on the right people at the right time to get them signed off can trip you up at the last minute, because 7 months after year end is not long, as it turns out, I'm afraid, to get the annual reports done as part of your year end accounting process. And then you've got other regulatory and reporting requirements to HMRC for taxation, particularly VAT, whether you're going to be VAT registered or not, and on information and comms office for GDPR. And because you are going to have hopefully lots and lots and lots of shareholders, and you're going to be having lots of personal info about them, including their bank account details, even if Bright is doing that share registry for you, you have to have somebody who's going to be your data controller. Next slide, please. So this is showing you the Mutual Society portal on the website of the FCA. It's great that they've now got it, because it was all done by paper previously. So there's a lot of stuff you can do on that directly through the FCA website. So please do go on that and familiarise yourself with what's on there. Look up the Low Carbon Hub IPS to see what's up there about us, for example. I don't know whether Kat wanted to say any more about that, but I think we can probably move swiftly on from there to the next slide. Record keeping. As everybody in the Low Carbon Hub will know, this is not my forte, which is why I need brilliant people around me like Kat and Saskia and Rachel, our COO. But as with everything else, and the keywords are in the banner there, it has to be appropriate and it has to be proportional. Otherwise, you will drive yourselves absolutely stark staring insane, and we don't want to do that. So the chain of logic from end point back to starting point is really what you're looking for all the time. So, you know, what's the relevance of this record? Why are you keeping it? How are you keeping that record safe? And how long do you have to keep it? Example we have is that we run a European Regional Development Fund program, and we have to assure MHCLG, which is the government agent on behalf of the EU, that we can keep those records safe for 10 years. So security and timing, how long do you have to keep them for? And also for me, there's a sort of succession planning point here as well. Whatever system of record keeping you have has to be robust when it's changed from board to board. So it has to survive. And I have to say, for both Osley-Lock Hydro and West Oxford Community Renewables, we're doing a bit of catch up on that at the moment to ensure that we're robust. We're actually making the change from treasurer to treasurer, and found all sorts of holes in the process of doing that we're madly filling now. You need to make a decision about whether that record keeping is going to be outsourced or done in-house. And I expect that a lot of that is going to be done by Bright on your behalf. So again, it's what are they doing? What are they not doing? what do you need to do is the set of questions to run through here. And if you're holding any personal data, you have to make sure you really understand how it's being kept and why it's being kept, and that you've got the right permissions from the person whose data it is. And Kat is saying she put in proportional as the GDPR regulations actually use the word proportional when they're explaining what you need to do. And we've certainly experienced the situation where particularly public bodies forget that word proportional and start being a little bit silly, if I'm allowed to use that word, about the way that they will or won't use personal or store personal data, which actually stops things from happening that could quite happily happen. Next slide. So your members, your most precious resource, you have to keep thanking them. You have to keep showing your appreciation to them. You're probably all going to be members yourself, so it'd be quite easy to think yourself into the position of a shareholder. But every time you communicate with them, every time you're not communicating with them, you have to be thinking about how it would feel to you if you were a shareholder who wasn't also a board member. It's quite easy to get out of touch. An example from West Oxford Community Renewables, we decided to stop having £10 share holdings, because the cost of administering them was more than the benefit of having them. And so we conducted a process of telling people that we were going to do that and making sure they were okay about it. And it was really surprising how many of those £10 shareholders were not happy about that change at all. And we hadn't consulted well enough before making the change. We had one or two cross people. So they're there for the long term. They're going to be there for about 20 years, probably longer than that, now that we're post-fit. We're certainly starting to think about projects that have a life of sort of 30, 40 years. And they're also a great resource. It's not just that they give you their money, but they really care about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And just from a point of very practical observation, they're a great resource if you need to succession plan for directors. You would hope that new directors to replace you as you want to move on to other things would come from your cohort of shareholders. So it's up-to-date records, making sure that you know where they are and that they know where you are, and that you do regular communications. Saskia and her team are absolutely brilliant at using all the online tools for this now that make life so much easier. But we found as the hub, because of our demographic, that there just are a handful of people who will only do paper. So we do mail shots, we do send letters, we do send hard copies, just to make sure that that handful of people who just don't do that stuff have all of the communication that they need. There's a point here that I'm not quite sure I understand, which either Saskia or Kat can come in on the chat line or come in here for me. Make the statutory work for you. Saskia, is there anything you want to say about that?
Can you hear me? I did.
Oh, I can. Yes, thanks, Kat. Lovely.
Yeah, sorry. You're doing brilliantly, Barbara. I'm making new points in my notes. That point is really about, the rules set out certain things about you've got to have an AGM, you've got to, keep members' details up to date, your member register. But that is kind of the bare bones. And the point is about how can you make the statutory requirements work for your actual relationship building and proper communications with members. And I did put in the chat, so the example with Kathy Ryan in there is showing how we used, having to have an AGM for the KIC, which we combine with the IPS AGM as well. So we bring our community shareholders, that are community groups from the KIC, together also with the IPS investor members, and quite often, obviously, there is a great overlap anyway. But we used that to have like a separate event just kind of before the AGM. That was a proper workshop about issues that the KIC groups wanted to talk about anyway. And, you know, so we did make the statutory work for us and for them. So, you know, they were already there, so they stayed for the AGM, but it wasn't just a kind of have to have boring AGM. And I know other people do the same, like the West Mills wind farm and solar cooperatives and the educational trust they set up as part of the community benefit. They always have a one kind of half day or 1 day AGM together and make it a bigger event with much more going on.
Yeah, that was a really fab event, and it makes an AGM enjoyable, and then you can do the you know, the necessary stuff as just part of a much wider, more exciting engagement.
And in the chat, Andrew has made the point about the draw of a good speaker. If you can find a famous lecturer, that's a great way of getting people to turn up.
Yeah, the other thing that that this doesn't talk about, which I do feel that we need to point out, which is sort of slightly less happy than what we've just been talking about, is that because of the demographic of the people who will invest in you, there will be probates quite regularly. We do about 5 a year, I think. I think Rachel was saying last time she spoke about it. So I'm presuming that, again, if Bright are doing the share registry work, they'll also be working through probates. But it's as well to know that and to know the rules, because clearly when that happens, it's a bit of a delicate time for the people involved, and it's really helpful for them if you know your onions around probate. Next. So that's your lot. If there are any questions that haven't been asked on the chat line. Okay, so Penny is saying that the subcontracted registrar handles probate. So yeah, it's an interesting one. That wasn't something we ever imagined we'd really become expert in when we started. And on the other thing to be said about that is that it's really helpful to make sure that you do follow up and make sure that everybody has filled in their death nomination forms, so that there's a sort of clear and smooth process to go through, and also to get sorted out how you're going to deal with children, so that you can be part of somebody's inheritance planning. But I'm sure that Sophie will be working, and Simon will be working on that when you come to the share offer drafting.
There's a question from Penny I was going to pick up on about AGMs and managing hybrid and in-person AGMs. Last year at the Low Carbon Hub, we did our very first one with remote access, so that we broadcast it. There are particular rules you need to be aware of in terms of people being able to see it in real time and being able to, it needs to have two-way communication. And at the time, we struggled like mad. We just about managed it. The technology was rubbish because of the rubbish broadband connection at the venue. So we struggled a lot. I feel that having now lived in a world of Zoom for the last 3 months, we'd be a lot better at doing that. You need to be aware that if you've got AGMs coming up, there have been relaxations around what's considered acceptable. So whereas in the past you may have had to do your AGM in person, there is a lot of relaxation now about whether or not it's possible to do it remotely. So certainly a charity I'm a trustee of, we've done a remote one, and there's lots of guidance out there about how to tackle that.
Yeah, and I think if you're going to do a hybrid one, Penny, I would say that getting your voting process well honed is going to be important for that, because the sort of timing and process and how you do it can, it's just thinking it through, because it can be a bit of a dog's dinner. We've done dog's dinner once, haven't we, Saskia, when we haven't thought it through properly.
Yes, did people feel we've answered the question on directors and qualifications in the chat enough?
Oh, where was that, Kat? That's what was the question there specifically?
I'm kindly doing my slot, so I had time to look at the Q&A. there was a question about whether there's any specific qualifications that directors have to have, and I said that you certainly mustn't be bankrupt. There is an act I can read out that you need to declare that you're not bankrupt if you are director or want to be a director.
Yeah, you're breaking up again, Kat. So I think I'm getting the gist. I'll try the gist of what you're saying, which is that anyone can be a director as long as you're not bankrupt, or I think bankrupt is the only exclusion, or have been excluded.
There are a couple of other, but there's a very narrow range of legal restrictions.
Yeah, but I think that if you haven't been a director before, and or you take on somebody who hasn't been a director before, you do need to make sure that they understand what fiduciary duty means, and what the they need some training on how to run particularly a community benefit society. So the training is key, I think, if somebody hasn't had that experience before. And I would say almost especially if they have got experience of being a director for a mainstream business, it's quite different from being a community benefit society, the reasons why you run it as you do. So Saskia.
I was just going to add that alongside that, having a job description for directors, having a declaration that they need to sign, as well as a really good induction pack, and thinking what your director, as you looking ahead to succession, thinking what is your opportunity to give people an exposure to what it's like being on the board before they have to jump in, and so that you get to know each other, is just all great things to have in place. And I know a couple of organisations that have really worked on thinking through what's in that induction pack, and by having a job description, then they're helping people realise that it's a serious role, and it gives you a chance to set out some of that kind of softer things around people's, for want of a better word, their moral compass when they are joining you as a director of a company for the benefit of the community. So it's just an opportunity to really give people lots of opportunities to read and really learn about what's involved, and realise that you're taking them seriously.
Yeah, and taking the recruitment process seriously. I mean, we made a big mistake quite recently, which was painful for everybody involved, and it stemmed from us not running a properly professional, I would say, recruitment process. And we've learned from that, and we're not doing that again.
Okay, great. Does anyone? We've got about 5 minutes left. Has anyone got any? I see there's a few back and forths going through in the chat box. I don't know if anyone's got any other questions they'd like to ask. Okay, it sounds like we've covered everything. If anything else springs to mind from anyone after we've finished, please do send it through to me, and I'll pass it on to Barbara and Kat. Thanks very much to Barbara and Kat, and I think that worked out fantastically well, given the technical difficulties we were having with the connection there. So yeah, thanks to both of you. And I'm correct in saying, Barbara, you've got some you can have some follow-on information as well.
Yeah, so Kat, I think I have to say a very big formal thank you to Kat, who put all the slides together and has put the follow-up document together. So what that is just a sort of recap of what we've been saying, with all of the links to all of the help that we've mentioned in there, plus all of the documents that I used as examples in my bit. So that'll be, the links to those will be embedded in the document. So hopefully you'll have to hand everything that we've talked through in a sort of couple of pages aide memoir.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so thanks again, Barbara and Kat, and I'm gonna close us down there for the session. So we will see you all at the next webinar. I don't have the exact date to hand, but I will, with a follow-up email, I will send a reminder to everyone so we all know when that is. Okay, thanks all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Graham.